get started. And again, welcome everybody. It's really great to see you here. I see a number of students have joined since I even just last checked. So lovely to have you here. One other group I wanted to really welcome was anybody who's watching the recording. So I know there are a number of students who are in training right now at their firms and they're watching or they've signed up and they will be watching the recording. So if that's you, delighted to have you. And I'm excited to share today's webinar with you, share this information. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out. So I should probably introduce myself at this point. My name is Paula Price. I am a former practicing lawyer. So I summered in the summer of 2002. That is basically when the BlackBerry device, I don't know if those are even in existence anymore, had just come out. That was a new thing. In other words, back when dinosaurs roamed the planet. And there's a number of things that have changed since I went through my summer as a law student at a law firm for the first time. It was back on, Bay Street. I was a law student at McGill University. And, I remember it really well. And yes, a number of things have changed, particularly the technology. But that transition from being in law school to law firm, that stays the same. And I was out last night. My son is starting high school next year. So I was out last night at a meeting for all of the parents to help them with their child's transition from elementary school to high school. And it occurred to me as I was listening to this discussion just how similar some of the factors of their transition is to what you're likely experiencing right now. So, with the elementary school to high school, for example, there's a change in the physical building. There's a number of new technologies that the students are going to need to get used to. Things are done differently. There's a different level of structure in place. The expectations are different. There are new people to meet with, right? Where are you going to eat your lunch? And how do you use the systems? And what can you expect? And so anytime you go through a transition, you're facing a number of challenges. And for you, and this goes back to my summer as a law student, every time you have a transition, it's going to be different. So student to lawyer, associate, associate to partner, partner to senior partner to judge, other types of transitions that you might make along the way. So every time you do something new for the first time, you're really going through a process. And so I want to acknowledge that for each of you, there is a transition that you're making going from an environment that is the academic environment to that professional law firm environment. So I'm delighted to have you here. A couple other things I wanted to mention about me, just so you know who you're getting this information from. So after summering, articling, I practiced for a number of years, most of that time here in Vancouver, where I live now, at a large national firm, uh, commercial litigation. And, I was there for, I would say, about a dozen years in practice before deciding that I wanted to become a coach. And so since around 2018, I have been developing my coaching practice. And in my practice, I coach lawyers at all stages. So, law students, articling and summer students, lawyers who are associates, partners, more senior partners. So, I really do work with a wide range of lawyers. And I've seen now through so many conversations with students, lawyers, senior lawyers, that there are certain themes that emerge that um, what I want to share with you today is tips and tricks and tools and strategies and practical information that will help you as you navigate your way through a firm. And this is based on conversations with students at your level. It's also based on conversations with the senior lawyers that are working with students at that level. So as a coach, I have this privilege of having confidential conversations with lawyers and students at all stages. And so I understand what each party really wants to say to each other. And in a way, this webinar is a wonderful opportunity for me to share with you some of the feedback that maybe I can offer you that maybe you can't get somewhere else. And so feel free to use me as a resource. Reach out to me after today's session if you think that's going to be helpful. I'm really here to serve, and this is really why I'm here. So, you're in the right place if you're a law student working at a law firm. Now, if you're not currently working at a law firm, maybe you're a law student and this is on the horizon a few years down the road. Great, good for you. You're getting some information ahead of time that will be helpful. You might be beyond the law student stage, or maybe you're an articling student and you're in the thick of it and you want someone or some guidance on some of the tips and tricks, what I would recommend for success in a law firm environment. Same if you're an associate at any level, really. What I'm going to share with you today is absolutely helpful for students who are making the transition from law school to law firm, and these are skills that will serve you well throughout your career. I'm going to be talking about some really foundational aspects of building your practice. So you're in the right place if you want to know what to expect and how to thrive. So if you're a summer student, you're a couple weeks in already. And so what's great about that is that you've now got a point of reference for the topics that we discussed today. And if you have questions, by all means, put them in the question or send me your comments through the chat because I want to help you. And then finally, you want practical ideas and strategies. One thing I hear a lot from the lawyers that I work with is that they want to work with someone who understands what it's like to be a lawyer, understand what the pressures and challenges are, the opportunities. And so I bring that to the table. I want to offer you tools that are actually usable as opposed to tools that work really well in theory, but not necessarily in a law firm environment. So today's agenda, we've already started. Welcome. We're going to dive into a discussion. So there's three main topics here: strategic goal setting, your internal market, and time management. So I wanted to focus on what I thought would be three levers that would be most helpful for you in making your transition. We're going to have time for questions, hopefully. Sometimes I get pretty enthusiastic about these topics, and so I will try to leave time for questions. And that will also depend on whether I see questions show up in the Q&A. So if you do have questions, please do put them in the Q&A so that I know to address them in the moment or save time for them. And that really covers the agenda for today. A few notes. I am recording the session, and so I'll send you an email with a link to the recording when we're done. I'm going to give you the slides. The slides contain text, and I was very intentional about what I put on the slides. All the notes that I would expect you or want you to take are on the slides so that you don't have to take notes. I'd much prefer that you think about how this material applies to you instead of worrying about copying things down. If there's something that really jumps out at you, by all means, write it down. I will be asking you to do 3 exercises today, so have a pen and paper handy. And I'm also going to be referring throughout to my podcast. It's called the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you haven't heard of it, it is a podcast I've been producing for years. I'm at over 200 episodes. It's not exclusively for women lawyers. It really is a tool and a resource for all lawyers. Some of the episodes are in the nature of, some of what I experienced or, things that are more specific to women. But by and large, everything is relevant to lawyers in practice. And some of the more recent episodes are really focused on summer students. So you'll find those. And I'll refer to episodes today that I think are highly relevant. So just wanted to give you the heads up. And then finally, next week, if you are joining me again, we're going to be talking more about how to implement some of the tools that we're talking about today, how to become a trusted go-to at work. That's what we're going to be focusing on next week. The timing will be a little bit different. We'll start an hour earlier than we did today. So let's dive in with strategic goal setting. Now, the reason that I wanted to start here is that the biggest shift that I see between law school and law firm is that there's a mindset shift. There's this idea in law school. Now, I understand in law school you are doing a lot of decision making, that you do have a fair degree of autonomy, but not to the same degree as you have in a law firm environment. So if you think about the structure of law school, for example, You have a set curriculum. You have courses that are on offered. You have a schedule that you set Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They all look the same week after week. There's seasons for writing exams, there's papers. You know what to expect. There may be answer keys for those papers or those exams that you're writing. And things kind of happen on repeat, and you're with a cohort of people that are all pretty much doing the same thing. And when you shift into the pace of a law firm, it changes quite a bit. It's a lot more dynamic, it's a lot more unpredictable. So the firm basically operates and does work that comes through the door. So you're now depending on what is coming in through your clients. It's impacted through the market, what is going on in the lives of your clients. Deadlines can come in from all different directions. So you'll have multiple clients in a law firm, whether they are internal or external. We'll talk about that. You'll have competing deadlines. There's no answer key, right? If you're given a research problem, it may be a novel area of law where there really is no answer key. There's no right answer that you can provide. There's no letter grade to tell you if you're an A plus or a B minus. And things change at the last minute. You're not doing the same work as your peers, right? Everybody's going to have a different role, different work. You might all be doing due diligence on one file together. So in that way, you might have teamwork. You're kind of doing the same thing. But if you're doing research on point A and your colleague is doing research on point B, you're not doing the same work, which is quite different from law school. So it's a different dynamic. And what I see as being the biggest transition, the biggest shift, is going from this mindset of almost being a student where things are structured and in place to being a lot more proactive, right? We want you going out and setting goals for yourself, being really proactive about the nature of your practice. People will say taking ownership, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. So I want to help you figure out how to take ownership. So I'm going to give you some ideas for how you can do that. So we're going to start with the three buckets. Sorry, actually, before we do that, I'm just going to go back. So I'm going to share the three buckets. We're going to talk about performance reviews as a proxy, and then I'm going to share the rule of three. So these are some helpful suggestions for you to set goals and be proactive in your practice. So the three buckets concept is that for you as a student and throughout your practice career, you can think of your practice as having three main components to it. There's your market, there's your legal skills, and there's practice management. Now, I've set them up in this order on purpose because market really is the lifeblood of your practice. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And as a student, you'll probably hear the term internal clients. That means the lawyers who give you work. They are different from external clients who may be the actual end user of the legal services. So if you've got a client of the firm, that's the external client. Your internal market, your internal client, that is the lawyer that you're working for or the lawyers that you're working for. And as a student, your market is primarily internal clients. And so we want you to be focused on the market for your work, which at this stage is largely internal clients. Now, market is important because that's how the work is going to come through. And that's when you get to develop your legal skills. So you might think of that skills bucket as the billable work that you do. What are the things that you do that you get paid for? So drafting, negotiating, producing memos, meetings with clients, advocacy, all the things that you consider your legal skills, that falls into that category. And again, when you're thinking about where you're at, when you're situating yourself in your practice, that's another bucket you want to think about. Particularly over the course of the summer, you might say, okay, what are some of the skills that I want to develop this summer? And then that third bucket is practice management. So when you have a market and people are sending you work, and then you've got your skills, you're doing the work, you're building your skills, then you've got practice management. And this is how you manage the flow of your work. So this is going to look different over time. As a student, you might think about practice management as meeting the deadlines people are assigning to you, keeping control over your schedule, understanding what work is expected, etc., meeting the expectations. It might involve delegating to an assistant. It might involve collaborating with team members. As your practice evolves, as you mature as a lawyer, you're going to start having people that you delegate to. You will likely start building a team. Your practice management skills at that point are going to evolve as well. So anytime you're thinking about your practice and you are maybe feeling a little bit stuck, or you're asking yourself, what is the next thing that I want to work on? This is a very simple framework. I use it with a number of the clients that I work with just to give a framework of where they can situate themselves and how they can look at their practice in a way that makes it easier to set goals. So, moving on, I was trying to think of what the most useful way would be to think about your summer. And where I landed was using your performance review as a proxy. Now, if you're at a larger firm, my guess is that you have a performance review at some point in the summer. And for a number of people, a performance review can feel stressful, right? You are being evaluated. It's right. It's like exams in law school, right? You're being evaluated, you're getting feedback, etc. And I don't want you to feel worried or stressed about your performance review. What I would love is for you to use that performance review as a proxy, something that will help you to identify some of the goals that you want to have for yourself over the course of the summer. Now, if you're at a firm where you don't have a formal performance review, that is absolutely fine. I would encourage you to set up a meeting with somebody in your organization who you can have a meeting with and make it like an informal review. I think that would be a really useful exercise for you. And even if you don't do that, then I still would encourage you to think about a notional performance review that you might have at some point in the future. Now, the reason is that this is going to help you focus. If you think about exams at law school, and if you know that, let's say your professor has an exam precedent, right? Here's what I've done in the past. That's a really useful tool. It tells you the type of question that you can expect to have on your exam. And so when you prepare for that exam, you can be more focused on it. So here, I'd like you to think about your performance review as a proxy in terms of what do you want that review to be like? So I've got a few questions on this slide. What will be evaluated, right? If you think about, what really matters here, what are the lawyers that I'm working with, what are they thinking about, right? Work quality, attention to detail, responsiveness, analytical ability, attitude, work ethic, hours, etc. So you might be thinking about some of the goals that you have for yourself in these different categories. You might think about what would you like to report on. So let's say at this stage you're thinking, well, and we're going to talk about this more because we're going to talk about time management. We're going to talk about developing a market for your work. I'm also going to ask you to identify some skills that you'd like to develop. So here, and you don't have to do it all within the hour of our webinar, you can have these questions, of course, after the fact, and you can reflect on these after the fact. But the objective here is to think about, okay, in that meeting room where I'm speaking with my mentor or the practice group leader, whoever it is, what would I like to tell them? You might like to say something like, well, at the beginning of the summer, I know I'm already interested in litigation. What I really wanted was to gain a better understanding. I've learned about the procedure in law school. I wanted to see a real case. I wanted to know what the life cycle of a lawsuit actually looks like. I wanted to get involved on some discoveries. I wanted to help out with document review. I wanted to learn what litigation software you have in place. So think about what some of your goals might be so that in that fictional, notional performance review, you could say, I set this goal for myself to do X, and I was really glad to see that I had the opportunity to do that here. You want to talk perhaps about challenges, right? Maybe one of the goals that you said is that you want to have an employment file. And so you're circling around the employment lawyers and letting them know that you're interested. And maybe there weren't any new employment files that came in. And so you weren't able to get involved. So you might want to say something during that review. One of the things I really wanted to do was to get involved on this employment file. The opportunity didn't really present. So, something that I'm going to continue to look for. That might be an example of a challenge, right? It might be an area for growth. Maybe it's skills. Maybe you're thinking, I've been working really hard this summer on writing clearly. And so that's something that I want to continue working on when I come back as an articling student. So, which would be a future goal. So what I envision as the exercise here is that self-reflection, self-evaluation, being able to put yourself in that point in the future when you're at your performance review. what is it that you want to be able to say? And that will help you identify now what you want some of your goals to be. And you'll see here there's a reference to podcast episode 181. So this is a podcast episode that I recorded, and it's all about how to leverage the performance review process. So that would be a really helpful episode to get you into the mindset of preparing for your performance review. Now, again, the angle here isn't so much about, you know, satisfying the test of the performance reviewer or being nervous about it. It's how can you prepare and how can you leverage that idea of the performance review to help you identify what you want to do over the next few weeks over the summer. The other thing, one last thing, is that performance review. I would love for you to think about it as being this it's a conversation as opposed to it being simply a one-way evaluation, because really the opportunity that you'll have within the performance review to share about your experiences, to offer insights that you've had over the course of the summer, to ask questions, that shows engagement, and that will bode well in your performance review. And you'll hear more about that if you listen to the podcast episode. So the final rule here, rule of three, and I kind of made this up, although I have heard other people say it. The idea is you don't want to overwhelm yourself with goals. So what I'm going to suggest here is that if you want to, absolutely brainstorm as many goals as you can think of. That's a really useful thing to do. And then select three. Or maybe you have a number of goals, you do three of them, and then you move on to another three goals. That's another way to approach it. The point here is that I'm trying to steer you away from overwhelming yourself with too many goals. And you'll note there's this image, the essentialist versus the non-essentialist. And yes, I see that there's one arrow, not three arrows. And I recognize that there is definitely a disparity there. But I wanted to show this image anyways, because when I first saw it, it jumped off the page at me, right? It makes the point very beautifully that if you try to focus on too many things at once, chances are you're going to get a little bit of traction in a lot of different directions, but you're not going to be able to go as deep. So I'd encourage you to think about that essentialist approach and pick goals that really are essential to you, ones that are going to move the needle forward for you. Now, again, I've got podcast episode references for this slide. Episode number 6 is way back at the beginning about goal setting. So I share my goal setting framework. And then episode 126 is one that I thought would also be helpful, right? This idea of having goals that are stretch goals. So goals that maybe feel really expansive and will require you to do things differently than the way you've done them in the past, versus SMART goals, which are a little bit more formulaic, a little bit more achievable. So I'll let you dive into those episodes if that's something that you are interested in. So the exercise that I have, and I'm actually not going to allocate time to it just because I realize I don't want to run out of time, is to identify 3 goals for your skills bucket. So what I will say about that is if you cannot think about skills or you can't identify skills that you want to develop, I would encourage you to look around at what other students are doing, look around at what lawyers are doing, particularly the lawyers who are a little bit ahead of you. You can ask them what some of the skills are that they might recommend that you focus on. You might ask a mentor. You might find there might be documentation or resources at your firm about some of the traditional benchmarks for what is expected for a summer student. But the purpose here is simply to start thinking about intentionally what kind of skills are you looking to develop. So moving on to the next pillar, right? We've now talked about being strategic. So we're moving away from this idea that someone else is setting up the framework for you. Yes, your firm will provide structure and support. And I'm inviting you to be proactive in creating your own agenda, right? Come with your own objectives and goals. Be proactive about that. So, and we talked about skills. So now we're talking about creating a market for your work, which truly is the lifeblood. And the reason why I encourage you to focus on this is that when I work with lawyers who are transitioning, some of the reason is that there's not a market for the service that they're providing. And sometimes that's exclusively because of the market, the external market, right? The idea that maybe they're an M&A lawyer and the transaction market just is dead and there are no deals. And so if firms are hiring back their students and there really is no opportunity, then maybe they are not able to bring people back. The market simply doesn't support it. And sometimes it's that there were opportunities to build a market, but the student um, didn't really know, right, to develop those relationships. And so that's why I think it's really important. And it's not just for students, right? It really is at all stages of your practice. You want to strike that balance, which is really hard to do as a lawyer. I think you'll have phases where it's so busy. You're in trial, you're in closing, and you can't imagine taking on another project. And there's going to be other times where you're sitting in your office and you're asking for work and it's very, very quiet. And so this does happen. And so what I'm trying to empower you with is the skill and the strategy to go out and create a market for your work so that you have more control over the type of work that you're doing, so that you ensure that you're positioning yourself for a group or a department or a lawyer who has capacity so that you set yourself up for success. So we're going to focus on building relationships, providing great service, and finally, strategy. So relationships are really key. And it was kind of neat yesterday at my son's high school orientation for parents meeting where they talked about this, right? Getting to know your fellow students. And so much of this is about integrating, right? And yesterday they were talking about joining clubs and all that. You might ask yourself what you can do within the law firm to establish your relationships with other students, with lawyers, with the support teams at your firm. Uh, these relationships all matter. We talked already about internal versus external clients, and ultimately, you will want to develop relationships with your clients, right? This sort of subsection is about developing a market for your work. So you're thinking about who is going to be giving you work, who is going to allocate that work to you. I encourage you to meet as many people as you can. What this means is talking to people. It means going to social events at your firm and making sure that you branch out. Now, a lot of lawyers that I speak with, a lot of students that I speak with, feel a bit awkward about social events. They may feel like they're introverts. Maybe this is not their natural habitat. You might feel like you don't want to do this. And the advice that I usually offer in that situation is number one, to give yourself a fairly modest goal, something that you think you can do. So if it's a networking event, for example, maybe it's a firm barbecue or a firm sponsored event, you might say, okay, I'm going to give myself the goal of speaking to 3 new people. And that's manageable, right? You can probably manage to do that. It's specific and it's less overwhelming than thinking, well, I have to talk to everybody. So give yourself a clear goal. And I always think it's helpful to focus on topics and building relationships with people where you feel a connection. So that's a couple of ideas there. Meet as many people as you can, take advantage of firm opportunities, have interactions that aren't just about getting work. So this is true. If you think about building relationships with lawyers who are potential referral sources of work for you, if we wait until we have a rainy day to fix the leaky roof, it's not the same as building a relationship with somebody. And then, when the work comes in and they know of you, then they're able to send it your way, right? I see this with job seekers, for example, right? If you are looking for a job and you're networking and marketing, it's a little bit tougher if you don't have a network in place. So you're going to want to start building your network. And it's helpful if you've already done a lot of that legwork when you were already employed or whatever it is, then it feels a little bit easier. So the point here is just to think about developing relationships outside of the work. Now, if you're working with an assistant, for example, you might also think about your relationship with your assistant. So if the conversation is always, can you do X? Can you do X? There's not a lot of room for building that relationship. So it might be really helpful just to make a point of checking in. Hey, hi, how was your weekend? How was your morning? If you've got something coming up, you might talk about it. You want to develop that interpersonal connection. They brought this up at the high school talk yesterday. They said your child is going to have a very interesting year. You might feel the urge to do X, Y, Z. but focus on connection over correction, right? So there they're talking about build that relationship as opposed to always correcting your child. So here you might just think about how you can establish relationships that are simply, forming the glue that will solidify the relationships you have. So interested over interesting. I think sometimes people can feel a lot of pressure that they have to impress others in order to make relationships. And what I'd invite you to think about is how can you be interested in that other person? What can you learn about them? What kinds of questions can you ask? People love it when you show an interest in them, what they're doing. So interested over interesting. And then finally, this last point, mentors and sponsors. So you might be assigned a mentor, mentors, and that is excellent. I encourage you to build relationships with those formal mentors. And I would also encourage you to reach out and form informal relationships or relationships with informal mentors. So that means that maybe somebody was assigned to you, but you have an affinity toward them. You're really interested in what they do. You really like their personality. Go ahead and initiate those relationships. Ask them for a coffee date. Ask them if they want to meet for lunch. Just go and drop by their office and have a chat with them. Sponsors and mentors are a little bit different. So a mentor is somebody who might be offering you guidance. A sponsor is somebody who goes that extra step further, right? And is putting you forward for opportunities. So within your environment, your law firm, your organization, you want to be looking for both. You want to have people who are going to advocate for you on your behalf. So that brings us over to service. So again, when you're developing your market for your work, you want to focus on how you deliver service. And there's a podcast episode. It's going to come out on Wednesday of next week, and it's all about building an internal market for your work. So I'm going to leave you to that episode to listen to some of the strategies that I'm offering in that episode to build your internal market. And you'll hear me draw a distinction or a parallel actually between building your market as a lawyer within a law firm and building your market as a server in a restaurant, right? There's so many parallels, right? This is a service industry. You're trying to deliver the best client experience possible. So, a few suggestions, and again, I go more into detail of that during the podcast. So, welcome your customer as you find them. One of the key pieces of feedback that I hear among management at law firms is that they really want lawyers who are starting out and students to be physically present within the firm because that allows for more opportunities for organic conversations and people can get to know each other. So I encourage you to have, and I talk about this in the podcast, but if you were a restaurant, you want to look like your restaurant is open, right? It looks lively, there's lights on, the chairs aren't sort of folded up on the table, signaling that nobody's around. Um, and you want to be really welcoming to the lawyers who are assigning work to you, right? This is having that positive outlook, having that strong work ethic, being inviting. Again, I go way more into detail in the podcast. Communicating clearly throughout. This really is all about making sure that you're you're clear on what is being asked for, that you are checking in with your lawyer on a regular enough basis that they feel like you've got this, they can trust you, they're not wondering, right? They're not sending you an email wondering if you're working on the thing that they've asked you to work on. If they're trying to find you, they can do that. So I've got some tips about how to communicate clearly. Now, this is also something I'll be talking about next week in becoming a trusted go-to. And then finally, delivering a five-star meal. So here you want to be thinking about, how are you producing the most beautiful work product for your client? And the reason I have a bag of groceries on the slide is because you want to think about delivering that perfect meal, right? Let's say your customer at a restaurant orders a steak, and you're probably going to want to do the steak to the way they like to have it cooked, and it might have potatoes and vegetables, and it shows up on a plate. It's pretty, maybe you've sprinkled some parsley on it, whatever. Versus if you were to show up with a bag of groceries with a slab of raw meat and some, I don't know, raw turnips, it's not the same experience. And I use that as an image because it's a visual, and I would love for you to think about what quality of product you're delivering when you go to your lawyer. Is this a five-star meal, or are you giving them groceries? And maybe they're asking you for groceries. Maybe they just want you to pull the 5 cases, but maybe they're asking for an analysis of the law in a particular area, in which case you want to do that work for them. So another example of a podcast episode is one that came out recently with Amanda Haverstick. We talk about legal writing. She talks about legal writing and how to really improve your craft as a junior lawyer. And she's got some really great suggestions there. Again, we're thinking about how you develop that relationship, how you win over your clients. And so you want to be delivering quality product. We want them to come back for more. We want to be asking for feedback. We want to offer dessert. Is there more that I can do on this file? And ultimately, what you're trying to do there is to become that trusted go-to. So again, if you've got questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any questions coming in, but I'm absolutely would be delighted to see them and to answer them. So finally, this idea of strategy. Now, this is where I think it get a little bit tricky for students, particularly maybe not summer students, but arting students, because when you're looking to be brought back to a firm as an associate, then there's this idea of, is there capacity within the department or the group that you want to join to bring on another student? So everything that we've talked about so far is, building your relationships. It's delivering service, a quality work product that means that people will want to come back and work with you more. And here it's looking at workflow, right? Strategy. So there's a couple of ways that strategy comes into play here. Number one is to be really proactive about seeking out work. This can be challenging, right? And I've spoken with so many students, right, who have asked for work and, maybe the work hasn't started showing up yet. And, what do I do? Do I keep going back to the same lawyers, et cetera? And so the answer may be yes, right? As we talked about in the last slide, or maybe the slide before that, the idea of not necessarily waiting until you need the work to start forming relationships. We want to meet as many people as you can, form those relationships, let people know that what you're interested in, how you can help them, and hopefully that will start to generate the work. And what can feel counterintuitive, and I'm going to encourage you to do it anyways, is that when you're busy, right? When you feel like you don't have capacity, there's no way you could take on anything else, to think about whether you can plant seeds among lawyers that you work with or that you want to work with about future work. And you can think about this as anticipating, what's coming down the pipeline. And if you do this while you're busy, then there's less of a chance that you'll be really, really busy and then there's nothing to do because you now need to go out and ask for work. And then it's more of these, these troughs and valleys. So I encourage you, sorry, troughs and valleys are the same thing, peaks and valleys or peaks and troughs. You want to be anticipating that, okay, I've got this project, but in 2 weeks, the trial's going to be done and I'm going to have time on my hands. So you want to be proactive about seeking out work. So that's kind of your day to day. And then in terms of the big picture, you also want to look at the firm that you're with and the type of work that you want to do and the different departments that are potentially bringing students on as associates, and ask yourself whether or not those groups have capacity. And this is really something that's more of a question for articling, but I'm giving you the heads up now because as you are in your summer position, you're already forming relationships. You're already seeing who's who in the zoo. So this will give you a chance to start thinking about, okay, when I come back next year, where do I see myself integrating into the firm? What department or departments do I want to learn more about? Which lawyers do I want to start working with? Because ultimately, it's the people in the group who are going to be hiring the students and associates into the group. So you just want to make sure that you have aligned yourself with a group that has a need, right? If there's a group that you're really interested in, but maybe they're not hiring, that's going to require some thought on your part in terms of what you would like to do next, whether it means going to a different group or looking for maybe an opportunity to do it somewhere else to do work that you want to do. So again, that's just thinking about the strategy of it. So the exercise here for you, should you choose to take me up on my challenge, is to identify lawyers in your firm, and maybe it's 3 lawyers, going back to that rule of 3, who you would like to form a relationship with. And the goal, of course, in doing that is to give yourself an achievable goal that you can work toward. And if you find that you meet those three lawyers, you make those connections, and then you want to meet more lawyers, of course, you can do that too. And that brings us to the third section that we're talking about today, which is practice management. I just wanted to give everyone a kudos um, for your attention. Hopefully, the pace of our webinar is suiting you, that you feel like you're digesting this. I recognize that I'm moving fairly quickly through these concepts, and I'm just hoping that this is landing with you. So again, feel free to comment in the chat or the Q&A. Let me know how we're doing. Practice management is probably one of my favorite things to coach on. And it's one of those areas that takes some getting used to. And the reason that I put the image of the shift is that there's a lot that shifts between being a student in a law school environment, as we've discussed, and working in a law firm. So again, I tried to think of what would be the three most valuable pieces of information or advice to share in today's webinar. And this is what I chose. One is plan and schedule. Number two, manage procrastination. And number three is record your time. So these are three areas that I think are going to have the greatest impact if you focus on them over the course of your summer. So plan and schedule. Now, again, I will give you a copy of the slides, so you don't need to copy out the notes here. And yes, I realize this is a very text-heavy slide. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to make sure that I would give you all this information. So people will often ask me about what is the best app? What's the best system? How can I be productive? And something that I heard recently, which I thought was really, really impactful, is point number one: the best productivity app is deep thinking. And we can attribute that to Charles Duhigg. He's an author. He's written some really great books, including Smarter, Better, Faster. So what I would encourage you to think about is whatever app you're using, right? If it's an app on your phone, if it's, I love sort of a planners. I like paper planners. I have a combination of paper planners and electronic. You will have whatever tools best work for you. And what those tools are helping you do is think about what it is that you are putting on your calendar, right? We want you thinking deeply about what you're doing and when you're doing it. So that is the starting point. So some of the practices that I encourage you to start developing from the outset is, number one, to practice planning your weeks. So it doesn't matter what system you use, right? Whether it's strictly electronic or paper or a combination of both. What matters is that it works for you. And I would encourage you to plan your weeks at the beginning of the week. So maybe it's Monday morning. I like to do it Sunday night or Sunday afternoon, and I encourage others to do it Sunday, because once you hit the ground running on Monday, you might find that there's already so much happening. You've got emails coming in, people are coming in asking you to do things, that you might find that you don't have that window, right? You lose that opportunity if things start moving really quickly. So I really love being able to plan on a Sunday. I also think it adds a certain amount of peace to your week when you've already looked at your week ahead and you know what's expected or what you expect to work on. Now, the reality is you're going to plan your week, and chances are something's going to change on your calendar. That's okay. It's still worthwhile to plan your week because you want to know what you have on your plate, what you might need to shift around if something comes in that is more urgent than what you've currently got scheduled. Now, when it comes to planning, so there's planning in the sense of identifying what needs to be done and kind of roughly sketching out when you plan to do that. The other part of planning that I think is really essential is scheduling. So that's point three, really. And that's when you take a day, right? And you look at that day and you think, how am I going to schedule my day to be productive, to get these things done? This is where I feel like I've done a ton of learning, particularly as a coach, and learned tools and skills that I wish I'd had as a lawyer, as a student, because it would have been really helpful, even at law school. If you think about those exams that you have or classes where you have one exam at the very end and you think, oh, I really wish I structured the lead up to this exam so that it was more structured. Or if you have a day, and for myself, sometimes if I sit down in the morning and I see that I've got, I've got an 8 hour work day or I don't know, a 10 hour work day, all this time that I can write this paper or produce this memo, whatever it is, it feels really big. It feels almost too big. And so, what can be really useful is to start breaking things down into smaller pieces. And this is what I recommend when you're thinking about how you're scheduling your time. So, unlike law school, where you've got a schedule and you've got classes and you're working around that, now you're the one who's setting the structure. So, what do I suggest? Having relatively set hours. So, pretty standard time that you would show up at the office and a regular time that you would leave the office. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the same every day, but I find having that set schedule is helpful for you because you're not reinventing the wheel every single day. Um, and if you're going physically into an office, that's great. That gives you a transition in, a transition out. If you're doing it at home, you might find some sort of a way of really signaling to yourself, I'm starting my day, I'm ending my day. That can be really tricky for lawyers who get distracted working at home because of all the things that they could be doing that are appealing to them. That brings us to anchors. What is an anchor? An anchor is something that happens no matter what inside of your schedule, and it serves the purpose of breaking up your day. So I just gave you two. When you start your work, when you end your work. Lunch is also a popular anchor, right? It happens in the middle of your day. So let's say you start work at 8 and then at 12, you've got a break till 1 for lunch. There you've got now a window between 8 and 12, right? That's a little chunk of time, a window. And then you come back and maybe you have a 3 p.m. Coffee or walk around the block. You've now got another chunk. 1 to 3 is another chunk. And maybe 3:30 to 5 or 3:30 to 6, whatever your end time is. So you've chunked up your day. And the reason you want to do that is so that now you're dealing with chunks instead of this kind of amorphous amount of time. So that's how I recommend approaching. Um, Sorry, I see there's a question that came in, so I was trying to pull that up. What is the name of your podcast? I'm a student. I would like to use your tips for my studies. So it is called the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I will send everybody who's here today an email with a recording, and I'll also add you to my email list. So you'll get the weekly podcast updates. I produce them weekly, and so um, I will make sure that you have access to that. And I will mention, episode 145, I refer to that here on the slide, is sort of a pivotal episode where I talk about, why time management is different for lawyers and what to do about it. And it refers to a roadmap that I've also created. It's a podcast roadmap. At the time, there were 27 episodes on time management. So I didn't want to overwhelm anybody with information. So it's broken down into categories. You can see what resonates, but there's a ton of tips and tricks there for managing your time. So today, really the takeaways are I would love to see you planning your weeks on Mondays. At the end of every week, you want to review what you've done and make notes before you leave the office about what you want to do the following week. I also recommend doing it every morning and every time you leave the office and check on your schedule throughout the day. So those are some tips. Number 4, plan for your energy. So once you've got those, when you've got those windows, then you can start matching up your tasks to your windows. Plan for your energy. So if you know that you're a morning person and you're generally sharper at 8 in the morning than you are at 3 in the afternoon, then you want to put your heavy lifting tasks then. And maybe you schedule things like responding to emails in the afternoon where you don't necessarily need that same level of focus and brain power. Afternoons are also a really great place to put meetings. I find meetings are energizing for me. And so when I can control the time, and you won't always be able to, especially as a student or junior lawyer, but if you can control the time, then you might schedule your meetings at a time that really works for you. Maintain your physical and mental health. This is one of the things I think we can very readily sacrifice. So make sure you're getting enough sleep, make sure you're eating well, make sure you're spending time with your friends and family, make sure that you're taking care of your mental health. It can be a pretty stressful time. So do you have the support that you need, whether that's friends and family, whether it's counselors, coaches, people at work, mentors, whoever, but make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And finally, when it comes to time management, and we've really scratched the surface here today, or barely scratched the surface, I should say. Things are going to change, right? You'll get a great system going, and all of a sudden, something will shift, and the thing that worked no longer works. You can expect to fall off the wagon. So you might have a great system in place, then you're brought into a really urgent matter, and you have to drop everything. And next thing you know, the urgent matter has cleared up, and you can't even remember what you were supposed to do. Yes, you'll need to sort of get back on track. And that is totally normal. I think it can be upsetting for people when they think, well, I had this great system and now it isn't working. It's not necessarily the system, it's that your practice changes. Things also stop working, right? So you might find you get bored of a particular practice or it loses impact. So reminders, notifications for me have a very low impact. I don't really even notice them. So that might happen to you too, where you just think, okay, this alarm is no longer very alarming. Um, Step number 2 here is manage procrastination. So I put this here because I have a lot of conversations with students and lawyers about procrastination, and it's normal, it's human. And so let's expect point 1 to procrastinate. This is going to happen. And my guess is that you have your own personal go-tos that you know you will procrastinate. Some common ones are big tasks, right? If you've got a big research memo and it feels endless, that might feel insurmountable. You don't know where to start and it seems overwhelming, or tasks that are kind of boring or tedious or repetitive, you might put off because you don't want to do them. Tasks that don't have deadlines are the worst, which is why I always recommend getting a deadline, because if we don't have a deadline, it's very easy to push them off into the future. Tasks where you feel a bit intimidated, right? If there's a memo that you're writing or a brief that you're writing or a contract and you are really wanting to impress, right? You really want it to be an A+ product. Sometimes that can cause you to procrastinate, right? The perfectionism kicks in and you feel like you don't want to write anything at all because it's not living up to your standards. So there's lots of reasons why you might procrastinate. And so I would invite you to be onto yourself, right? You're going to procrastinate unless, well, maybe not everybody, but most people that I know at some point procrastinate. So expect it, it's okay. And what are your usual go-tos? And then what I would encourage for procrastination is to use what I call the pizza method, right? And really, the pizza method, it's a bit of a shorthand. It's a little memory tool so that it sticks out. I find that most procrastination measures really are one or some other way of making a big project more manageable by breaking it into smaller pieces. A couple of ways you can do that is the Pomodoro method. So that's when you take time and you say to yourself, okay, this thing that I need to do is going to take me 2 hours if I were to do all of it, but I really don't have the bandwidth for that right now. Maybe I can just do the first 15 minutes. So you set a timer and you do that amount of work on it. So the reason it's called Pomodoro is that in Italy, they have these tomato timers. You use them in the kitchen. And Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. So think pizza, tomato, set a timer, 5 minutes. You can get yourself into that task. And that might actually get your motivation started, right? You initiated the task and then you can keep going. Another way to deal with procrastination is to take a task and break it up into smaller chunks. I think this is super handy, right? I mean, I did this for my presentation. You'll see it's all in different stages, right? Everything's broken down into little sections. When I prepare, for example, for this session today, I gave myself a checklist. So anytime you break a project down into smaller pieces, then you can attack one piece at a time. So that is a salami method, because you might think about a tube of salami. You can cut that into slices and then you just take it one at a time. And then the third thing here is to identify the emotions behind procrastination. So this is not something that I really thought about until I dove into the world of coaching, but it's very much why people procrastinate. It isn't so much, it's not a character flaw. It usually is the result of an emotion. So you might think of boredom, you might be dread, fear, fatigue, self-doubt. So notice what emotion is coming up for you, and that will give you clues in terms of how you can go about solving the problem of procrastination. So I've got a ton of episodes on the podcast about procrastination, so I'm not going to say more about that here. But if you are interested in that, you're welcome to download the podcast roadmap or search the podcast with the word procrastination, and you will find a lot of resources on that front. Record your time. So this is the third piece of advice under time management for anybody who's starting out at a law firm. And the practice of recording your time, I found very foreign when I first started out. Now I love it, even though I don't log my time typically in 6-minute increments. I do record my time every day because I love having a record. It helps me stay focused on what I'm doing every day when I'm noting down what I do. So you're going to be recording your time. This is how your firm keeps track of how much work you're doing, your capacity. It's how clients get billed. So it's the lifeblood of your firm's financial health, right? You need to have that billable time so that they can invoice the clients. And it's an important skill, an important habit to develop. So I'm encouraging everybody to start strong. Develop it as a habit so that it's not something you have to think too much about. And again, I've got a podcast episode, The 5 Ds of Docketing. So I'm going to refer you there to go more in depth if this is something that you're interested in learning more about. Why does this become a problem for lawyers? Emotional resistance, right? Just like procrastination. And in fact, it is procrastinating. If you're not doing your timesheets, you're not entering your time, you are procrastinating. And usually there's an emotion behind that. One of the most common things that I hear is people having resistance, lawyers having resistance to recording their time because they feel badly about the time. I often hear it shouldn't have taken me so long, right? You think about the work and it took forever, and so down the hallway would have done it in half the time. And so sometimes you might be under recording your time. And most firms that I'm aware of don't want you to under report your time. They want you reporting the full amount of time. Now, I encourage you to check with your firm, make sure that that's actually what they want. But it's a reason why people might not bill. It can also be the opposite. If you find you're really, really quiet and really slow, you might feel embarrassed that you're not recording more time. And so as a student, my guess is that you don't have a mandatory target. You might ask what the expectation is so that you've got a sense of whether or not you are on target, because if you have no clue what number of hours is normal, you won't know how many hours that you should be aiming for. So I would encourage you to get that information, whether it's from another lawyer or another student, a junior lawyer, your professional development director, a mentor. I would get that information so that you know how many hours roughly would be reasonable. And that way you'll know if you're, on track. And again, if you're having resistance, then notice the emotion. Okay, I'm feeling it shouldn't have taken so long, etc. And I realize that we are pretty much at time, but I'm almost done. So I'm going to wrap up very quickly. Build trust and accountability. So my view on docketing is that it is one of those things that you can do. And when you do it, it's a little bit like brushing your teeth. No one's going to, they're not going to have a huge parade. Unfortunately, you might get some recognition. You might get a thank you. We notice that you're doing your timesheets on the regular basis. Amazing work. Well done. You might get a pat on the back. But it's one of those things. It's really essential. And if you don't do it, it causes problems, right? Accounting can't do their invoicing. People might start asking you why you haven't invoiced or billed your time. It gets harder to record your time the more time passes by. Again, I go through all of this in the podcast episode about docketing. And so I would encourage you to use it as an opportunity to build trust and accountability, build that habit from the outset so that people know that when they've got you on the file, they're not going to have to worry about, whether or not their time has been entered. So with that, we are now in the exercise here is, again, going back to the rule of 3, set 3 goals for yourself, right? In terms of time and practice management, what does that look like for you? Maybe it's I'm going to make sure that my dockets are done by the end of every single day, or I'm going to docket in real time as I go, even better. Maybe one of your goals is I'm going to make sure that I sit down and schedule my time every week, or I'm going to have a plan in place for if I find myself procrastinating. So you can decide what your goals are. I encourage you to set a few of those. And that brings us to the final slide and the final summary. So I'm going to wrap us up because we are at time, and I'm going to encourage anybody who has questions to submit questions because I'd be happy to answer them and stay on a bit longer. What we talked about here today then is in terms of setting yourself up for success, we had three main areas that we focused on. Number one is strategic goal setting. So shifting from that mindset that the institution, the school has set things up for you and you're kind of following the path. We want you being really proactive in seeking out work, seeking out relationships, deciding what you want your summer to look like. We talked about the three buckets of your practice, right? The legal skills that you're developing, the market that you have, who is sending you work, and the way that you're managing your practice, managing your time, delivering products on time, etc. We talked about the performance review as a proxy. So going out into the future and thinking, okay, what do I want to be able to say in that context? And then setting your goals up so that you can do that. And then the rule of three, this idea of essentialism, we don't want to pick so many goals that we don't get very far on any single one of them. So I've suggested maybe three at a time. Internal market. So here we're really focused on building relationships internally, right? Building relationships internally with lawyers who are going to send work to you. Maybe it's lawyers who are going to talk to other lawyers who would be in a position to send work to you. But that's the first focus, especially for your summer. You want to get to know everybody. Service. So again, that's that analogy between being a student or a lawyer and a server in a restaurant. How are you delivering the ultimate experience, that 5-star meal to your client? And then need, right? Where is there a need? And if you're thinking about strategy and where you want to position yourself as an associate joining the firm, where do you see yourself going? Is there a need for that? How are you going to address that? And then finally, time and practice management. So that's where we talked about having a routine, having a practice of planning out your weeks, scheduling your days strategically. I've got a ton of resources for that on the podcast. We talk about procrastination. This is really common, especially after a busy period where maybe you've been operating on, coffee and high motivation, and then things slow down, or you've got these big projects with fluid deadlines. So you might want to have some tools to deal with that. And then docketing, right? This idea of being proactive, keeping on top of your timesheets, and getting your systems going from the beginning. So I don't see any questions. So I am going to assume that this has been, oh, wait, here we go. Do you offer coaching on how to write and crack law exams? I do not. I do not. But, and I actually don't know anybody who does, unfortunately. The pace has been ideal to balance engagement and absorption of material. Thank you for the helpful information. You are so welcome. Thank you so much for that feedback. I'm thrilled to hear that because that is my goal, right? Is I want to keep the pace engaging and also digestible. So that is amazing. Thank you for that feedback. If there are no questions, then I am going to wrap up today's session. It's really been fun. I am so happy to have you join me again. For anybody who's joining for the recording, it's great to have you here. And if you have questions, you're more than welcome to reach out. I will be presenting again on Friday of next week at a slightly different time, 11 a.m. Pacific time. And what we're going to talk about there is going from, we've talked about some strategies today. Where people get stuck and where a coach can be really helpful is getting people from that knowing what to do to actually doing what they know they should or want to do, right? That can be a real challenge. And so that's the focus next week. And again, I'm drilling down to what I think is most relevant, particularly for students. So communication is first on the list. Confident communication that instills trust in others. That's your spoken, the way that you speak in a firm. It's not just a boardroom where you're delivering a presentation. This is the interactions you have daily within your law firm. So the spoken communication as well as written communication. So how do you communicate confidently in a professional environment? And there may be some differences between what you're accustomed to in the academic setting or in other workplaces versus a law firm. We're also going to talk about feedback. So, how to use feedback, formal and informal feedback, to learn and to grow. This is an area where a lot of lawyers and students struggle because law firms aren't always an environment where you get a ton of feedback. So, how do you deal with that? And it's not because people don't want to give you feedback; it's because it's a fast-paced environment. People may not think to deliver that feedback, and so what do you do to learn and to grow? And if you do get difficult feedback, how do you process that feedback? How do you learn and grow from that? And then finally, mindset. And this is really all about how to approach your summer, your career challenges in a way that you will thrive. And I'll be talking a little bit about Carol Dweck. You might have heard of her. She has written a book called Mindset. She talks about the growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. If that's new to you, it's a really powerful reframe of how you can look at challenges and things that are difficult. If this is a familiar concept to you, it'll be a great review and something that hopefully will help you to leverage the challenges that are going to come up in the summer and also in your practice. So, with that, I am going to say a big thank you to everybody who's joined me here today. It's been a pleasure having you, and I'm excited to see you again next week. So, thanks again for joining. I hope you have a fabulous week. I hope your summer is going well. And again, any questions, feel free to send them my way.